Okay, thank you very much. Good morning. Thank you, Victoria. Thank you, Sergey. It's really, it's a real pleasure and an honor to be here. I have to say that speaking after the amazing Tigipkos in Ukraine is kind of like speaking after Bill and Hillary Clinton in America. Or maybe like speaking after David and Victoria Beckham in England. So might be more appropriate. So given the combination of brains and beauty, I'm not going to say which has which, but I think we all know. Sergey, you're a smart guy, but your wife has you beat in the beauty category. Okay, it's a fantastic conference. I want to thank you for inviting me here to speak. It's a really impressive setup. I was very impressed as I came in. I saw so many people that I know from looking at different investments that we've made or that we've looked at investing in. So what I'd like to do is talk today about emerging markets on the global VC map and where we are and where I think we're headed in general. When I first came to Kiev, I came here many years ago. I was a student many years ago. But I came here, and probably my most memorable time was when I was here on Black Tuesday in August of 1998. And I brought an investor group here with me. I had the heads of major pension funds, AT&T Pension Fund, US West Pension Fund. We all came here. We picked up the Financial Times in the morning, 1998, and George Soros had just decided that he was going to short the ruble and decided that it was time for the ruble to crash, and that's exactly what happened. The ruble crashed, we went into crisis, Russia was in crisis, Ukraine was in crisis, the CIS, the whole region was in crisis, and there I was sitting with all of our investors, telling them what a great place it was to invest here, and what a great reason. But I will say 10 years later, I fast forward to 2008, and we've been investing in this region for a long time. Already later, we invested in a company here called EPAM Systems. And to this day, EPAM now has 2,400 employees in Ukraine and 1,600 of them just in Kiev. So when I think about the days of coming here, 1998, crisis, devastation, etc. Fast forward to 2008, fast forward to today, I can say I think about Kiev as a city. I think of it as having all those great qualities of resilience, never giving up, a desire to succeed, and the fact that if you try hard enough, anything is possible. So it's really, for me, a city of rebirth and a city of resilience. Let me give you some background. There we go. Some background on Singular Guff, who we are and what we do. We're a private equity fund. We're a private equity firm. We manage about $11 billion of private equity assets globally and about $3 billion in the emerging markets. Across the emerging markets, we've started, our very first fund was in Russia and CIS in 1991. And we went into the other emerging markets from there. We've invested in China, India, Brazil, and we have a very large team in Moscow, and we have an office here in Kiev. When I look out at people that I know in the audience from some of the companies we've invested in China, we've invested in Perfect World through one of our managers. I know Sergey Orlovsky is here in the audience today. He's a pioneer. He's one of the pioneers of gaming in this area. He brought Perfect World to the area. I'd like to welcome him. In Russia, we're an investor directly in a company called Parallels. I think you all know what Parallels does. You'll see Sergey Belousov. I noticed he was here last night, and he's here today. Kupi VIP is one of the fastest growing e-commerce companies in the region. That's headed by a great entrepreneur named Oscar Hartman. Oscar is here also. And EPAM Systems Carl Robb is also here in the audience. I've had the pleasure of working with Carl for a long time. I'd like to, I've always joked with Carl, I say, behind every successful IT entrepreneur in Ukraine is a Ukrainian wife. And Carl's recently married to his Ukrainian wife, and they just had a baby. So if we could congratulate Carl on his latest development. We also have been the co-manager of a series of funds doing venture leasing and lending in Silicon Valley. And it's been a pleasure to be in that business because we've had a view of all the different high-tech and venture capital companies that need funding. They come to our fund for, which is called Now Run Today by Western Technology. We're the largest investor in that fund today. And all companies come for, I would say, final financing in their early stages of leasing. It's a kind of financing that hasn't been pioneered yet here, but is something I think will happen. Already one of our companies, a Ukrainian company, came and got some financing from our fund in Silicon Valley. So in that fund, we've invested, we lent the very first money to Google back in 1998. And also did an investment in Facebook when they were founded. So venture leasing plays a very important role in stimulating growth. There's good news and there's bad news in the venture capital industry. First, I'll give you the bad news. The bad news is that investment returns in venture capital have been awful for a decade. Awful. If you go talk to any foundation in the United States, any endowment, you talk to the Harvard University Endowment, you talk to the Notre Dame Endowment, Stanford Endowment, any longtime venture capital investor, they will tell you that except for the top 10 venture capital funds, returns have been almost near zero for over a decade. So we look at the 1990s. 1990s was a great time for venture capital. You had multiples being paid back to your LPs. People were making 3 to 4 times their invested money. The average life of a portfolio company was only 3.5 years. A very short window to go public in an IPO or do an M&A transaction. Average fund sizes were 100 million or below. And we all know that size is the enemy of good returns. When a fund gets too big, chances that they will make 3 or 4 times their money as a fund, practically impossible. So the 1990s was just a great time. If we fast forward to the year the 2000s, from the tech bubble and thereafter, awful. So now we're looking at fund returns in hindsight, average fund multiples only about 1.2 times over a 10-year period, not very good. Only 6% of venture capital funds had IRRs in excess of 20%. So private equity during that period far, far outperformed venture capital. The average life of a portfolio company now in the US is 8 years versus 3.4 years in the 1990s. At the same time, the average length of a marriage in the United States went to 7 years. So now you're holding on to your venture capital companies longer than you're holding on to your wife or husband in that case. So this is really a bad, development. It's allowed, if you look at Yuri Milner and the rise of the style of investing that he's done, it's really a response to the fact the IPO market was closed. And Yuri Milner went out and he provided secondary financing. He was financing the sales of stock that people normally would have sold on the IPO market. So in a way, he was a creator, but he was also a consequence of that market. So essentially what we have out there, 2,000 companies get funded every year in Silicon Valley. Not everybody going public. Bad returns overall. What we have is what they call the walking dead. We have walking dead companies. We have walking dead funds. If we look at global VC returns, thank you very much, you'll see in 1996, bull market, 4.5 times was kind of what the average fund was making, and then you see how it just drops off a cliff. And those vintage IRRs are really, really low as you head into the 2000 period. There we go. Oops, sorry. We'll get that back. But this shows that fewer funds raising much, much more capital. The average fund size is now, used to be 40 million. We're now looking at average fund sizes of 160 million. And as I said, size is the enemy of good returns. Wealth creation, there are winners, but it is very, very concentrated right now in a small number of really great success stories. Only 2% of the companies that have gone public, of all the tech IPOs from 1980 to 2002, have provided 100% of the net wealth creation of IPO companies. And the other scary statistic about concentration in returns, and this comes from Mr. Horowitz at Andreessen Horowitz, 97% of venture capital returns in any given year come from only 15 investments. And that's over about 2,000 that get funding. So if you're not in those 15, your fund returns are not going to be that good. So how do VC funds look if you take out those 15 magic deals? These are end-to-end returns. These are not IRRs. End-to-end returns for 15 years. All VC funds are only up 38% over a 15-year period. Not annual, total. Now, if you take out top 5 firms that have had successes, you're down to about a 1% IRR. That's the middle bar. The bar on the far right, if you take out the top 10 firms and all their successes, you get a 9.6% return over 15 years, end to end. You're now under a 1% IRR. So you're losing against inflation. You're barely keeping up, even if you invested in US Treasuries, which are at an all-time low. So very, very bleak picture. Now, that's the bad news. What's the good news? The good news is that as a result, venture capital firms have started going abroad to look for better returns. The National Venture Capital Association did a survey in 2011. What are your plans to invest abroad? Over 40% of respondents said they plan to increase their international investments from their VC funds in 2011. So that shows you that given the picture in the United States, yes, there will be winners. Everyone's shooting for a Facebook or a Google. But knowing rationally that they're not always going to be successful, they are now looking for better returns outside. Accel, been very, very active early in the process to get outside, and I think their returns have showed that. Accel's been a fund that's been active here in the region. We've seen Kleiner Perkins very, very active in China. Sequoia China alone just did a fund that's $1 billion. Sequoia China, $1 billion. In 2005, their first fund for China was $200 million. So we see others, Bessemer, Dahl Capital, et cetera, all going abroad, and we see them actively investing. So why is it? What's the reason? Let's go back one. So why is it? Tell me why it's investors are going abroad. So it's like what Willie Sutton said, why he robbed banks. It's where the money is. And the same case for investing abroad. It's about the internet. It's where the subscribers are. So almost half of all global internet subscribers are in the US or the BRICS, just the 4 countries of the BRICS. That's total internet users. And we know that the internet has changed everything. So as a global phenomenon, it's flattened out, lots of competitors, old line business, every single business has changed. It's a global phenomenon with global opportunities. Whether you're searching for a product, whether you're getting a product delivered, whether your payment systems are relying upon it, whether there's advertising attached to it, the telecom systems that you're using, the smartphone that you're using to access e-commerce, that is all dependent on new developments in the internet. And so what we're seeing is is that's where everyone is headed. I now have control, right? Good. Emerging markets. Emerging markets now account for 9 of the 10 fastest growing internet markets. Take a look at the year-on-year growth. You'll see double-digit growth in every area from China, India, Nigeria, Mexico, Russia, Iran, Turkey. And then look at the number 8 market, US, 245 million internet users, 1% growth last year. Not very impressive. China today with 513 million internet users, that is greater than the entire US population. Okay. China has really been the primary recipient of the influx of money that's gone out into the emerging markets. You see in 2007, they were only about 7% of emerging market fundraising. Now they're up to 43%. So China is really the big beneficiary, and essentially they're crowding out other regions. If you look at the regions that have had less success raising money, emerging Asia, so the other smaller countries of Asia getting crowded out by China. India, for its own reasons, getting crowded out by China. We'll hear about India later on today. But India has been, I would say, crowded out. And even in Central and Eastern Europe has been crowded out so much. So why has China been such a magnet for venture capital? The answer is scale, and the answer is growth. They have both in China. And a lot of it is predicated on the fact that they have such a large number of people entering the middle class. So if you look at brick consumption as a proportion of US total consumption, consumption in the BRICS is almost 40% of US consumption now. And that's up from 1999, it was only 20%. Over the next 10 years, 800 million middle-class consumers from the BRICS alone are going to enter the consuming society. So basically, in China, if you can start a company that's a national business, you now have access to 1.3 billion people. You have access to a large and growing middle class on a purchasing power basis. And so what the VCs see is that you can get venture capital returns of the 1990s in the United States without taking the technology risk that you have typically in venture capital. So basically the story of China is when you hit big. India, as I mentioned, has been a very soft fundraising environment. You see the figures falling. Investment returns in India have fallen too. There are lots of reasons for that. Most recently, the government has had and this is a cautionary tale for all emerging markets. The government in India came out very publicly with some anti-investment statements. And what happened? Funding dried up. Foreign investment essentially came to zero and stopped. The government made noises about trying to get back taxes from one of the cell phone companies. They went to Mauritius, which is a little bit like Cyprus, as an investment point and banking center for investment. They wanted to open up taxation cases there going back to 1964, and all of that has had a very dampening effect on the India fundraising environment. So only lately, the government realized when they say something, people react to it, and now they're trying to turn the situation around. Central and Eastern Europe, becoming a destination. You can see from the number of VC funds that have been raised, fairly steady. You see a big spike in 2007, as we saw around the world. But venture funding is alive and well, and I think we'll see exactly why. More recently, if you look at what's happened in terms of the kinds of funds raised, very few private equity funds have been raised in the last several years in Eastern Europe and Russia. It's really been, there have been more venture capital funds raised than there have private equity funds. And we're in both parts of the business. We're a private equity firm, and we also are doing technology and venture investments. Our most recent fund that we launched is in technology. Our fund is in those numbers. But it's really been VC, not private equity. And I think that tells you something about the nature of the market and the nature of opportunities that people see. Central and Eastern Europe, the internet audience is really what's driving people's interest here, I think, and this is very hopeful signs. We know that Russia alone is 60 million and growing in terms of internet broadband penetration. If you look at Ukraine's numbers, Ukraine, by virtue of population, will exceed Poland. My guess is that we'll have Ukraine as a very strong number 2 anchor in this whole picture. We also have to remember that per capita income in this part of the world, much, much higher than it is in the other BRICS. So we have a real opportunity to see some boom times in venture capital in the region. In Central and Eastern Europe, another area that's primed for investment, mobile page views. This is mobile data following the same growth as mobile voice, and big, big area of potential growth. Here we see also, and there's still a lot of upside. So if we look at what is essentially this says that we have opportunities for programming and applications for smartphones. Smartphone penetration is only 14.8% in Central and Eastern Europe versus 40 to 50% already in the US and Western Europe. So still a long way to go in all the businesses surrounding smartphones, devices, as we go from old generation mobile to smartphones. So language and proximity and culture is destiny, and I think that's what this slide shows. If you look at social networks, local champions are very prevalent as you look at what I would call our part of the world and also China. So whether it's search engines like Yandex or Baidu in China, or you look at the social networks, they are very, very localized and tend not to be global. The globals exist side by side, but the number 1 market share leaders are local. Also, you see some of the highest daily usage rates in the world in Central and Eastern Europe on social networks. And I've seen the numbers, and they are particularly high in the wintertime, no doubt because of the unique weather and climate. So again, I mentioned that we have a lot of local firms in this region, and that we're not dominated by the global firms. And I think that says something. It's not really about weaknesses of the global firms in this area. It's not about business practices. A lot of people have said, tough to do business in Russia, tough to do business Central and Eastern Europe. That's not what this slide shows. This slide shows something different. And again, I would contrast this to India. What this slide shows is that there's real entrepreneurship, there's product being created here, not just services, but product companies, and those product companies are very, very popular. So I think that's another great sign and augurs really well for the future. Talent. This is one of my favorite slides. It's something that at EPAM we keep a very, very close tab on. These are the results from the 2012 ACM Collegiate Programming World Finals. And if you look at that, 14 of the top 20 teams come from Central and Eastern Europe. That's just amazing. I remember when 6, 7 years ago, when we first made our investment in EPAM, going to marketing meetings, calling CEOs and telling them, you've got to hire talent in Ukraine, Russia, Belarus, Moldova, Poland, Hungary, Eastern Europe. And everybody said, I want to be in India. Nobody had confidence in the region. Today, it's a must-have. You must have some outsourcing, some programming, some development in Central and Eastern Europe. That is going to drive a lot of other types of growth when we look at the region. Tech expertise. This is really also something that I think is going to show seeds for the future. Seeds for the future is really track record. Track record is everything when you're trying to attract capital. And we look at the track record now of some of the really great names and great products that have come from the region. Skype is well known to everyone. AVG recently went public this year. Evernote is well known and growing. I don't know anyone who uses Evernote that doesn't love the product. Yandex, of course, the biggest, and Mail.ru. Yandex and Mail.ru, the two largest internet companies in Europe, are Russian. And that tells you something about size of the internet and where it's moving. So, Ukraine. What's the big news alert on Ukraine? IT is a huge, huge opportunity for Ukraine. The IT outsourcing sector reached over $1 billion in 2011, and the news alert here, it's now greater than arms and weapons export for the first time ever. So that to me tells you that is the future. The future is in brains, the future is in intelligent work, it's in an innovative economy, and Ukraine is already putting up the figures to show it. 16,000 graduates coming out with IT specializations. Within the IT world, it is the fastest growing area for programming, and it has a lot of advantages. It has no visa for most European companies, no visas for IT specialists from the US coming in. So huge, huge advantage over the competitive countries around Ukraine. Only ranked 26th worldwide. But in my mind, it is no doubt Ukraine will be a top 5, possibly a top 3 destination for global programming. Vutal, great success story. It was acquired by Google under Motorola Mobility for $40 million this month. And I think that's a great story. We also, 2 other companies that we've talked about before, but if you look at the site development platforms that have been developed in Ukraine, whether it's companies outside using development or homegrown, these are the success stories that we need to hear more of. I've mentioned EPAM several times, so I'll skip through this quickly. They did hold an IPO, again, adding to the track record of companies in the region. It was a New York Stock Exchange listing. If you look at also the kinds of companies that EPAM has attracted to the region, Expedia.com, lots of experience in online booking and reservation systems, International Hotels Group. EPAM is the top outsourcer for Google, and generally known as a developer's developer. Over half their revenues originally started from the big ERP platforms looking for outsourcing part of their systems. So whether it was Microsoft, Oracle, SAP, and others being written by EPAM programmers in this region. 92% of EPAM's workforce here in the region. And as I mentioned, Ukraine, the fastest growing area for programming for EPAM as well as for the entire industry. I would say, again, I mentioned things that other governments do badly. I mentioned the example of India. When you take a government action, you will scare people away if you do the wrong thing. Ukraine has worked hard. I have to give credit to Sergei Tagipko and his team and the government in general trying to make laws about taxation for programmers and for the industry better. What did that do? It has attracted clients. It has built up employment, bigger employment, even at lower tax rates, means more tax revenue for the government, and it also means higher quality jobs. If you look what's happened to manufacturing in the United States, all the supporting industries that support manufacturing have now gone to other countries where that manufacturing takes place, whether it's China or Indonesia or other places. The opposite is true. When you start to have the building blocks, quality education, and outsourcing in general, now you have some critical mass. And that critical mass is going to support the next generation of breakthroughs in IT and technology. So I have to say, government policy makes a difference, and our applause and thanks to people in the government working to make Ukraine a good technology destination. It can go both ways. And luckily, the trend line is up here. So, what are some of the global trends? Global trends, and what is it going to mean for big successes of tomorrow? Those who captured the opportunities in the big mega trends and global trends, they're going to be tomorrow's big winners in technology, and they're going to be the people who make all the money. So, just looking at smartphone subscribers today, off of a very low base, this is total users, this is total subscriptions. Some people have multiple subscriptions on one phone, but it's total subscriptions. Smartphones are only 953 million across the world. Dumb mobile phones are up over 6 billion subscribers globally. So we're going to see a six-fold increase as eventually everyone is going to have a smartphone. Mobile data. This shows you that mobile data and use of mobile phones are moving in double-digit growth against e-commerce, which itself is a double-digit growth market. So in terms of where I think the confluence of two powerful trends are, it's in both the smartphones and in e-commerce. Advertising spend. Advertising spend is also a beneficiary of what's happening. You look on the left, look how newspapers have been the big losers over the last several years. Print is still 25% of ad budgets, only 7% of time spent looking at newspapers. What will change, we now have television is about in equilibrium, but the internet still out of equilibrium. Mobile. Mobile is where we're most out of equilibrium. There's still a very large gap between time spent on mobile media and the total ad spend. That gap will absolutely, definitely close. Advertising dollars follows the eyeballs. And it's not just smartphones. Tablets and e-readers. That's another area in hardware, and also the applications that go with it. Today, 29% of adults in the US own tablets. That was only 2% just 3 years ago. So these are markets that have explosive growth, and when you have explosive growth, you have opportunity. The other big opportunity, big data. Big data, big theme, could be big money here. If you look at everything that's going on, between today, 2012 and 2020, we're going to see data needs increase in terms of terabytes 50 times. Some people put it at 20, other people put it at 50. I believe in the 50 number. That's everything from video streaming, two-way screen viewing, everything from refrigerators to oil platforms, sending information, feeding it back, feedback loops to data centers. So those who can store, those who can collect, those who can collate, those who can analyze all this data, they're going to be big winners between now and the next 5 years. So what is the takeaway and what's the difference between yesterday and today? Basically, everything has changed. Everything has changed from the old way we did things to the current day. Whether you go from the way people spoke to each other, the way people got their news, the way people take notes, the way people look for services. People used to have a Yellow Pages. It doesn't exist anymore. You have to use Yelp. If you look at video rentals, there used to be a thing called Blockbuster. It's bankrupt. It doesn't exist. You download it now. It went to VHS, then it went to disc. You're going to download, you're going to stream, and those speeds are going to get faster and faster and faster. Sound, music, everything. Every single aspect has changed. The internet has flattened, it has disrupted, it has changed the way we do everything. And therein is why, getting back to why venture capital is now becoming a global phenomenon. It's changed not just in one country or 5 countries or the fully developed countries. It's changed in every single country around the world. So, I'd like to say a few things about this brave new world. What is the environment of the future? The environment of the future, we're going to have ubiquitous, almost everywhere, high-speed wireless. That'll happen in developed countries and in developing countries. We've had technology innovation everywhere. We have entrepreneurs now. Everyone is connected. I probably have more in common with all of you out there than I did with the person that was next to me as my next-door neighbor growing up in the United States. So I wouldn't say global elites, but people who are digitally connected and people who are working in the new economy. We all have more in common with each other than we might have with the people that you grew up with as your neighbors. There's capital available. That's pushing over borders. People have signed up for WTO. Countries have signed up for WTO. Capital flows freely, and it does flow to the highest and best use. We're going to have inexpensive devices, and we're going to be able to reach millions of new users in record time. So what does that mean? It means grabbing the trends today is going to determine who are tomorrow's technology billionaires. And I know that several of them are sitting out in this room today of tomorrow's technology billionaires. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Drew. Appreciate it.